Welcome to Unit 1, Lecture 2. This unit lecture is going to focus on sex, gender, and sexuality and the relationship between the three, and also talk a little bit about science and constructivism as you read about in your readings. So sex is defined as categories of male and female defined by biological characteristics. And as you noticed in your readings, primarily that sex is defined that way right now as a duality since the 19th century. A duality meaning that you're either one or you're the other, but it hasn't always been this way. So currently, we understand this to mean that if you're a female, you have XX chromosomes and you have these biological characteristics, these reproductive organs, and if you're a male, then you have these chromosomes and you have these reproductive organs, and you're either this or you're this, and there is no in between. However, there are intersex children, and they're actually not as rare as we would think, and we would think that they're rare because we never ever hear about them, but if you check out the link that I posted, you'll see that they're actually more common than we think, and generally the way that we approach intersex children, which are children that don't have fully developed organs in either direction, and either female or male genitals or reproductive organs, generally when they're born, they're assigned a sex. So the parents are told, here's your baby, raise it as a female. Here's your baby, raise it as a male. And most of the time these babies are raised female because it is easier to make genitals look like a vagina than it is to make genitals look like a normal penis. So that's your sort of quick and dirty lesson on intersex, but if you follow the link, you can learn a lot more about it from that short reading, and there are images and things like that you can check out. I think it's pretty interesting, but it also shows that this is a construction. We have decided that there are two sexes, but there's this whole category in the middle that children are being born, and we are saying, okay, well, it doesn't fit, so we're gonna either put it here or we're gonna put it here, and hope it turns out okay. And a lot of the stories of these kids are pretty sad because they don't turn out, they grow up wondering why they don't feel quite the way a normal girl or a normal boy would expect to feel. So that is sex. In relation to this, we have gender. And gender is defined in your book as assignment of female, masculine and feminine characteristics to bodies in cultural contexts. And they specify in cultural contexts, which you know about from the last lecture, because masculine and feminine characteristics change based on where you are in the world, where you are in history, right? Where you are even in the United States. You might be considered very masculine somewhere for being able to do some specific sport or have some specific skill, but in another country it might not be considered very masculine. It might not be a representation of your gender very much at all. So it differs based on cultural context, but generally, and hopefully you can sort of think about what your list would be for your cultural context that you've grown up with. But normatively in the United States, we think about feminine characteristics as someone who is pretty sensitive, emotional. There are a lot more, right? But let's stick with those two for now. And masculine characteristics as being someone who is athletic, aggressive, tough, not very emotional. So pretty much the opposite of someone who's feminine. And we think just like, and it is presented, and I'm not saying you think this way personally. We're talking about norms here. We're talking about generally accepted cultural practices. So if you're sitting at home right now thinking, well, I don't think that women have to be that way, or I don't think that men have to be that way, it's not so much about what you personally feel, it's more so about what is culturally accepted as normal. So these are generally accepted as normal, expectations for what would be considered feminine or masculine. And we think about feminine or masculine just like sex on poles. You're either feminine or you're masculine. And when you fall in between, we start having reactions, because those are the people who aren't fitting into one of these categories, just like intersex kids. But it is even more common that we'll have people who fall out of a category and don't fit into either acting out their femininity as a girl because they are a girl, or their masculinity as a male because they are expected to be masculine because they're a male. And then we start seeing women who are maybe called a tomboy or a butch, or people think that they're gay, and you may be able to think of other terms that a woman would be called if she doesn't effectively act out her femaleness. And then for a man who doesn't act out his masculinity, here are some terms that he may be called: a pretty boy, a fag, gay, a bitch. What is really interesting about these terms, and you may have already caught on, is that when people don't act out their gender, oftentimes the terms that they are called are directly connected to gender and also to sexuality. Many of these terms that we're seeing here have to do with a sexuality, and many of the male terms for someone who isn't fitting into effective masculinity are ways of calling the man girly or womanly, so we're feminizing that person, and for the girl, we're saying that that person is being too masculine, and these are ways of bringing the person down. So you can see that gender and sex are both very closely tied, because your sex organs in our culture define what your gender assignment and what your gender characteristics are expected to be. And when you fall out, or when you don't conform to that expectation, you are given terms like this: you are marginalized, oftentimes. And we're talking about generally, we're talking about norms, right? Okay. So, how we generally, societally, and science approach things like gender and sex and sexuality, and I know you've seen this before, is constructed by our social context, our framing. So what we see as normal teaches us norms, and then those who follow the norms or challenge the norms are impacted. So the people who were inside the circles, or the descriptions inside the circles, were inside of the frame, right? We have our cool kid again. And the people who fell out of the frame, the intersex children, the people who don't fully align to their gender conformity, don't perform their gender effectively, are marginalized or experience hate at the worst experience. So to recap, the way we think about sex and gender and sexuality feels and seems natural, right? It feels natural to all of us. It feels normal because it is constructed as a social norm. The readings that you covered this week presented evidence that all of these categories have been defined differently historically and also in different cultures. Thus, realizing that a system like gender is culturally constructed doesn't mean that it's not real. It's real, it's something that we are part of every single day of our lives. But instead, it allows and empowers us as critics to question why the systems are constructed the way that they are. Why is sex a duality? Why is gender an either or, right? Why isn't there a center? And from asking those questions, we can then go even further and at times ask who benefits from such constructions. And in future units, we're going to be doing that. We're going to be asking, you know, who benefits from these constructions and who is harmed by the constructions. So that is essentially all for now. And if you have any questions, please ask it on the boards. And I hope that you enjoyed the readings.